This is a tutorial on how to use the PrusaSlicer with the Prusa Mini and the Digital Learning Lab. When you open up PrusaSlicer, this is the screen that you should see. You will see the build plate in the middle, some adding tools up at the top, editing tools on the left, and then print settings on the right. With your model, you'll click this Add button, find your model, and load it onto the build plate. From here, some of the settings, if you did not want that model, you could delete it. You could also delete all. So if you have multiple things on the build plate, you can also hit delete all. You can also then copy and paste and have multiple iterations of your design. But we'll go back to one. Some of the simple editing tools that you have access to is the Move tool. This allows you to move it within the build plate. Notice that if you go outside the build plate, it will turn it into blue and show you an error in the bottom right-hand corner that is outside the print area. You will not be able to slice this until that is fixed. You can also drag these arrows, more specifically in directions. You can also go up, but with any slicing software, something has to be on the build plate for it to print. So this will always snap it back onto the build plate. The second option you have is scale. It gives you some boxes that you can change. I can change the size in many different directions. I can also drag it by the corners to do a uniform scale. Again, beware of scaling too far beyond the build plate boundaries. These object manipulations also exist here on the right-hand side, where you can type in specific values to make those changes. For scale factor, I can do it for like 150% and have that go across all of them, or I can unlock it and only change one aspect and leave everything the same. I can also do that for specific sizes. So if I've modeled something and I know I want its length to at least be 100, I can type that in specifically while leaving everything else the same. The third tool is rotate. I can grab these particular arrows and rotate my model. Note that when I'm rotating, some of it is going through the bottom of the build plate, but it'll automatically snap it back to where it is touching. If I keep my mouse over the little notches, it will do 5-degree snaps. If I go anywhere inside or outside, I can get a little bit more specific with my rotations. The fourth tool is place on face. So if I've been rotating and manipulating it a little bit, once I click this, I will see these transparent shapes. These are places that I can click where I can place that image, place that actual model on the build plate. So if I click here, that is actually going to be the flat bottom of my model now. It's now flipped it. I can go here. That's my new one. So I can even print it up by letting this be the bottom, and it will print in this configuration. Note that there are better configurations for prints. Having as much of it on the build plate as possible is usually the best situation. There are other situations where it's better to print in a different way. Be sure to talk with the Digital Learning Lab to determine that. And then the last thing is that you can cut this. So if you have a model and you're only wanting half of it, or your model is better to print in 2 halves and then glue it together, this allows you to move this plane. I'll move over here to the side so that you can see it. I can move this plane It'll automatically, when you click this, go to the halfway mark, but I can choose other locations of the model. And then there are some selections here. I can keep the upper part, I can keep the lower part and just slice it. And I can also rotate the lower part upwards. So this is good for splitting in half and immediately having everything on the print bed. So perform the cut, everything's there. I can click off, I can move, and now I've got my two parts that I can print and then glue back together. Again, another slice is maybe I don't want to rotate that and I only want to keep the upper part. I can perform the cut. It keeps the upper part and of course then lays it onto the print bed. One last thing that I will show on the print settings here is there are different types of presets for the different types of quality that you want, the different types of speed. Draft 0.25 millimeters is the fastest that you can go with the least amount of detail, and you can go all the way up to 0.05 millimeters ultra detail. The trade-offs for these is if you're wanting more detail, it's going to usually take a lot longer and take a lot more layers to print. And then the draft, it takes little time, but the quality may end up suffering. You may not get detail out if you have some really intricate designs. So you will select based off of what works for you. The filament for our Prusa Mini will always be generic PLA. Make sure that is selected. The printer must be selected as the original Prusa Mini and the Mini Plus. Depending on your model, you may need supports. So if anything is floating in the air or is not supported by anything below it, so as an example, these curves are a really good example. Here in this particular section, this is kind of floating in the air. It doesn't have anything to support it. 3D printers cannot just print in air. You will need a support. It builds up some plastic so that it can print your model on top of it. Best rule of thumb is just to have supports just in case. And then there is infill, which this being a solid, it's not going to print it completely solid. It's going to print it partially hollow. That is what the infill is. So the solid portion of your model can be 20% infill or 40% infill. So depending on what you want for your design, you're going to choose the best option for that. 20 to 30 is recommended for most things. So we'll just go for 30. And then you'll want to select brim. Now, before you slice it, you can go here to the bottom left and go to a preview. What that's going to do is kind of slice it beforehand and show you what it's going to look like. On the right, you will see that this is going to be printed in about 176 layers. I can go through all of these layers and see this is where the infill comes into play. I can see that it's infilling with this particular design. So it's not a completely solid material, and I can go through here and analyze what's happening. These green structures, those are the supports. So it's going to print these so it's able to print that part that's actually floating. So an example, here it is. There's the support. These pieces are about to come together, but in order to do that, it has to have that support and then print on top of it. Once you look at everything and you have it exactly how you want it, you can look here at the bottom and see how much filament is going to be used, what is its estimated printer time, and then you're going to export the G-code or slice now. What that's going to do is it's going to bring up your save G-code file. What you're going to do is take the USB drive out of the Prusa Mini, place it into your computer, save it to that particular USB drive, and then that is what you're going to use to print on the Prusa Mini.